meeting today's freight challenges, eliminating excess packaging, and rising robotics. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner. Unlock the power of a seamless connection. Werner Intermodal combines a massive nationwide rail network and cross-border solutions into Mexico with an expanding private fleet and total digital visibility. Secure your capacity today at choosewerner.com. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, it appears that the freight recession that the industry has endured the past couple of years might be ending, yet other challenges remain in a very competitive market with still lots of uncertainty. How do shippers, carriers, and logistics service providers meet today's biggest freight challenges? Senior editor Victoria Kickham finds out with today's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Today's guest is Marc Held, CEO of freight monetization platform Hoptek. He's here to talk with us about the many challenges facing freight operators today and how shippers, carriers, and logistics services providers are dealing with those challenges. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I wanted to just start by asking you to give us a brief description of Hoptek. What services do you provide the logistics and supply chain industry?
So Hoptek builds revenue systems for asset-based trucking carriers, so like the people who own the trucks, mostly as a mechanism to help the trucking companies make as much money as possible. And so kind of the area that we focus on within the universe is it's twofold. We accept the right freight. So if you're familiar with the world of trucking, Walmart will tender freight to trucking company ABC all day, every day. And they have teams of people kind of deciding, hey, do I accept this? Do I reject it? And it's this constant balance of, have I made Walmart happy? Can I make more money somewhere else? And so we basically codify the strategy of the business to help the company effectively accept the tenders almost instantaneously, kind of making sure they maintain their customer commitments while also helping find freight that fits backhaul or find freight that will fit their network. So we are constantly bidding on freight on behalf of our customers, again using that same fingerprint to say, hey, we see that there's this freight available over here and there's some freight over there. We think it will fit for a truck that isn't going anywhere, and we think we can make some money off of it. So you can think of us kind of just understanding trucking companies so that we are effectively trying to make sure that these trucks are always in motion and with the right freight at the right time.
Terrific. Thank you. And I bet you use a lot of technology to do that, which we'll dig into. But what I wanted to ask next is, everyone is facing higher costs these days. The companies you're just talking about, shippers, carriers, 3PLs. What are some of the key strategies you see companies using to address those issues? And what are kind of the biggest, cost increases that you're seeing?
Yeah, and for those who aren't super aware of the market, I mean, we've got diesel, it keeps on getting more and more expensive. I think it got 40% more expensive since last year. Driver pay and insurance are at record levels. There's just a lot of funkiness going on. And what we've seen work really well is that customers that stop cutting cost and instead start defending revenue start doing really well. I mean, most carriers have already cut everything that's cuttable. You can't cut past the bone. And so the remaining margin is really in load selection. We're also a little bit biased just basically by the technology that we have in that, our hypothesis with diesel being as expensive it is and, trucks not being used effectively costing these companies money is that empty miles are effectively the cheapest fuel savings available. I mean, you don't have to get new equipment, you don't need to have new hires. And then on another pillar that I look at is shippers are kind of at rebuying capacity, not price. So I think spot has been moving above contract for the first time since 2021. So routing guides have started to fail and the cheap contract rates kind of become fiction. So there's a few levers that I think we've seen work pretty well.
Thank you. So, aside from rising costs, so what are the other major challenges that you see facing freight operators today? What are the biggest, issues that your clients are facing outside of
We're in a
costs?
very weird time right now. I think the market is such that like capacity is no longer being removed by policy. It's not necessarily by the cycle. So there's a lot of regulatory enforcement that's happening. There's a lot of news recently about non-domiciled CDL rules and the whole, English language proficiency thing. I think that alone has taken tens of thousands of drivers off the road, and now we have all of this Supreme Court rulings that I don't know if you guys are following, but the
Correct.
Supreme Court rulings, I think, are safety is now paramount. So that's caused some interesting issues if you're a broker, which has made the bigger carriers even more appealing to work with because the bigger guys have the money to actually afford to spend on the training and making sure that everything is as it should be. Checking the safety data, making sure they can document the selection of the carriers they're working with, and refusing the folks that they would broker stuff off to. So is an interesting time for sure. I also should say that volatility has started to become a real challenge for folks. I think last week, dry van spot rates fell more in 1 week than in any comparable week since 2008. It's a very strange market. And then even looking at the internal operations of these companies, we start to see that data tends to be trapped within the four walls of the business. So a carrier's own history is spread over a TMS, a load board, an ELD, an email. There's a million places to be looking for things.
There's a lot going on for sure. I think that was a really good summary. So my next question is about technology, particularly AI, and how is that
Yeah.
helping to address, all of these issues, or even just a couple of them? How are you seeing AI being applied to help with this?
So I've been building AI products for decades, and it's taken a bunch of different manifestations over the years. I mean, ML was a big word. We had neural networks. We had, now every piece of technology is AI nowadays. And with the current universe of things in AI, I think the useful applications are narrow and repetitive. Is basically anything that you can take that's unstructured and turn it into structured stuff. And so for us, that means, scoring every tender against your network, your cost, and your next load. And of course, because we're nerds, we need to do this instantaneously because it turns out that responding to a tender in, moments is actually useful. Another thing that we see within the trucking universe is, your best planner on their best day, they're going to do great. After a very long day, the decisions start to get a little bit more questionable. And so by throwing in some of this AI, it helps support in this decision-making process to really enable the planners to be their best. I mean, AI in freight is not necessarily about replacing dispatchers, not about replacing planners. It's about giving them the answer before the phone rings. So it's a really interesting time to be in AI in freight.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think of all the various logistics areas that we cover, I think trucking and transportation is certainly making a lot of headway with the applications you just mentioned.
Yeah, I should just not to
Go ahead.
interrupt.
No, go
I
ahead.
do think that like for sure, no matter what, AI does not fix bad data or broken processes. If you can't answer basic questions like what did this lane cost me last quarter, like no AI, no model will ever save you. So, even though we are kind of, I wouldn't say in a golden age of AI, like there's definitely a lot of stuff going on, but age-old adage that has been repeated ad nauseum in the industry is garbage in, garbage out. So you got to absolutely make sure that the stuff that you're making decisions against actually makes sense.
Yeah, have good information, clean data, all that. Um,
Hmm.
Along those lines, or sort of related, we write a lot and talk a lot about cybersecurity because it's an increasingly important topic in logistics and supply chain, and especially in trucking and transportation. How well do you think the trucking sector, in particularly, is addressing this issue in terms of protecting their own assets and information from that kind of perspective.
So this is a really interesting problem area, and I don't know if people recall back in a few years ago there was that cyber attack that took down Maersk for
Hmm.
quite some time. I think as technology gets more integrated in everything, I think the short answer is not well enough. I think
Yeah.
the threat has basically changed shape in the past few decades. I think if you really think about it, cargo theft is effectively now a cybersecurity problem. I mean, you have attackers using phishing, you've got this, FMCSA credentials get stolen all the time, you've got hijacked carrier identities, compromised dispatch systems. Like there are so many ways to screw with cargo that it is like the surface area just seems to get bigger and bigger. I think if you're looking at cargo theft losses, it's I don't have exact numbers, but I mean it's inching up towards $1 billion in
Yeah.
2025, like huge amounts of money. And I think most of these, or a good chunk of these, tend to be cyber enabled. It's no longer just someone, taking a gun and robbing someone. There's things are getting much more sophisticated. And unfortunately for the industry at large, I mean, the large carriers have security teams, but the small and medium-sized fleets that feel the damage first as like a major financial event, like there's just no technology, there's no infrastructure for folks. There are some really good vendors out there that are helping and supporting. We're big fans of the folks over at GLCS that are kind of an outsourced IT shop for some of these smaller and medium-sized fleets that are really trying to help make sure that everything is good and safe.
Mhm.
But I think the industry at large still has a lot to go.
Yeah.
Um,
I think you're right. The landscape has completely changed. You're right about that. Is there anything else about the current state of freight markets that you think is important for our listeners to pay close attention to right now, or anything you see coming down the road?
I mentioned this a little bit earlier on. I think in earlier this year, the Supreme Court ruled that federal law does not shield freight brokers from state negligent hiring suits. So the standard is traditionally, ordinary care. It's check safety data, document the selection, refuse carriers with red flags. Like it's more complicated
Hmm.
now. I think safety records now carry commercial value. I think quality carriers just got more valuable to every broker in the country. I think we're going to see a lot of owner operators run into some challenges. So I think that is absolutely something that folks need to be looking at. I also think that the gap between spot and contract is becoming more and more massive. I think routing guides are going to have some issues with the current market trajectory. I think we're running into peak season, into a thin market capacity that's left because of the CDL rules, or they're not coming back. So it's only
Right.
going to get worse. So I think all of this is to say that the freight recession trained everyone to compete on price. And I think this market rewards operators who compete on reliability. And it's just a completely different muscle that most of the industry is not used for quite some time. So it's going to be an interesting time.
That's for sure. Mark, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been a really good conversation, so thank you.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. We have been talking with Marc Held of Hoptek. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Mark and Victoria. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. Part of the cost of every online purchase has to go to properly packing the product for shipment. But Ben, sometimes it seems that shippers often tend to overdo it when it comes to packing materials used.
Yeah, it's a complicated arithmetic there. You want to match the size and the weight of the item with the box. There's right sizing. There's the dimensional weight for the rates that we are just talking about in trucking for carrying it. But if you've ever received a home delivery package of an e-commerce order, say, and you pull out a tiny little object with a large pile of styrofoam peanuts, then some of the new rules coming online might make sense here in different regions. This is an effort to help reduce some of that waste. The problem is that those wasted packing materials, like the excess size of the box itself and the extra weight, there's difficulty in recycling all the packing materials. All those things contribute to pollution and carbon footprints, not to mention to the cost of the company that's shipping it. So to help online consumers and e-commerce retailers trim their diets for all that fluff, these new rules could require businesses to reduce that excess and also to prove that the packaging they do use can be more easily recycled than current ones. So this week we saw one of those new examples. This was regulation in the European Union. So an overseas example. This came online. It's called PPWR, for Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. Supporters say that by reducing those items we've been talking about, that'll do away with, there are fragmented different national standards across the EU. Also, as we said, cut greenhouse gases, less plastic use, decrease pollution on land and sea, reduce some of those PFAS forever chemicals, particularly in food contacted packaging. So a lot of benefits.
Yeah, those all sound like very good goals, Ben. But of course, the main reason why we sometimes see excesses in materials used in packaging is because it's a lot better for operations to use standard size boxes and processes. It makes those packing operations easier. So, in order to meet some of these goals, it would also mean that DCs and fulfillment centers would need to make changes in their operations. And of course, that comes with extra expenses, right?
It does. Yeah, for sure. And this is one of those classic sustainability debates. Is it worthwhile to spend a certain amount of investment now to make a change, or to paying a larger amount in the future to fix the damage that it could cause? In this case, e-commerce companies have some help, either with the extra costs or figuring out that balance point. That's because the new EU rule, and as well as some other rules, such as some laws that are coming up in California, they're known as a group as Extended Producer Responsibility, EPR laws. They're being also supported by like material handling equipment and automation companies. So in California, that applies to their packaging equipment machinery makers who've been adjusting their products for these sorts of changes. So this machinery can now handle what's called light-weighted packaging, post-consumer, which is recycled packing materials, smaller pack sizes, or elimination also of secondary packaging, like the box around the box. Likewise, in Europe, we also see some help from the machinery providers. In this case, not so much machinery, but it's the European Pallet Association, or EPAL. That's a nonprofit German pallet exchange pool. And because those new EU regulations hold that pallets are part of the transport packaging and come under scope of the rules, EPAL now provides for its users confirmation that its pallets are recyclable and reusable. And that helps e-commerce companies prove they're in compliance with the laws and, cut their costs in making some of those changes we discussed.
And while these all seem that there's going to have to be some adjustments needed, I think overall the new goals are good for the industry. Right-sized packaging and better materials save on shipping costs, also produce better customer satisfaction from customers who don't want to have to deal with all that excess material waste that they've got to throw away or use, or deal with a much bigger box than they really intended for the product. So we'll keep those customers coming back as well. So I see a lot of benefits that could come from this.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to do it right. You have to keep businesses in operation, and make it easy for them to adapt. But if we're able to hit that balance point, there are definitely benefits all around.
Right. It is a delicate balance. Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, we report all the time about the growth of automation and in particular robotics. And now you've discovered some new data on the impacts that industrial robotics are making in North American facilities.
That's right. So demand for robotics continues to rise, and that demand is actually broadening to reach a wider range of industries. This is according to information from the Association for Advancing Automation, or A3, which released second quarter data on robot orders earlier this month. The group found that North American companies ordered nearly 9,000 robots valued at about $622 million in the second quarter of 2026. That's a year-over-year unit increase of more than 4% and a revenue increase of more than 21%, according to A3. And those second quarter results brought first half totals to nearly 18,000 units, valued at more than $1.16 billion. That represents 2% growth in units and 6.6% growth in order value compared to the first half of 2025. So some pretty solid increases there.
Yeah, seems to be. And Victoria, you mentioned that demand is broadening. What did the report say about that in particular?
Well, the automotive industry has long been one of the strongest drivers of growth, but there's been some softness in that market lately. The A3 report pointed out, though, that the growth in general industry is helping to offset that softness. And just to give you an example, automotive OEM orders for robots declined 25% during the first half of the year, and that compares to a 35% increase in orders for robotics for semiconductor and electronics industries, and a 32% increase for life sciences and pharmaceuticals. Automotive components and food and consumer goods were other areas that kind of helped boost growth. Those results continued a trend that's been building over the past several quarters, according to A3's research. Another interesting fact I saw was that the report found that collaborative robots continued to represent a considerable portion of the automation investment during the first half of the year. And we've certainly seen that happening across warehousing and logistics. We report on that quite frequently.
We do, and we hear a lot about collaborative robots often, as you mentioned, but it seems to just make sense to use this kind of automation to make that human workforce all the more productive and efficient.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, be interesting to watch some of these trends. Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories, and also check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Marc Held of Hoptek for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Werner. Unlock the power of a seamless connection. Werner Intermodal combines a massive nationwide rail network and cross-border solutions into Mexico, with an expanding private fleet and total digital visibility. Secure your capacity today at choosewerner.com. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.